So many people swear by food tracking. They say it adds an extra layer of accountability and helps them really see the dietary patterns and stay on their diet when they're trying to lose weight or if they're doing something like getting ready for a bodybuilding competition. There are also a number of studies that show that those who track their foods tend to experience better results compared to those who don't track their foods. And I myself kept a journal of every single meal that I had for the first 15 years of my career when I started training, which meant that I had literally dozens upon dozens of notebooks with my handwritten accounts of what I was eating because back then we didn't have cell phones, nor did we have computers to track what we were eating. And so everything had to be handwritten. And I do believe that that was instrumental in my ability to evaluate what my diet was and create the diet that I use today. So you might expect that I would be a strong proponent of the idea of food tracking, and I'm not. And in this video, I'm going to explain exactly why I don't recommend food tracking for all of my clients coming in, and also talk about my experience with a group of 400 men and women who I worked with over the past 3.5 years with food tracking applications, and show that the issue of food tracking isn't as cut and dry as the more you food track, the better results are going to be. Stay tuned. We'll talk more about this. But in this video, we're talking about food tracking. Does it really work? And is it something you should be doing? Before I go any further, I'd like to thank everyone for the tremendous support I've had so far for this channel, especially those of you who say this is an excellent resource for anyone interested in training naturally. So do be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you're first in line to get the new content as it comes out. So on to our topic at hand. As I said before, I personally logged every single meal that I ever ate for the first 15 years of my career. And it was instrumental, as I said, to my success. It was also instrumental to the success of the high intensity training system that I created. That being said, I don't believe it's for everyone. And what I'm going to start with is an example of when I first started using food logging for my clients. I was contracted by an organization to work with a large group of people. And it was the first time I ever included food tracking in my services. I was working with a clinical dietitian at the time, and she recommended that I use this particular platform whereby clients could log their foods and I would be able to see what they were eating in real time. Not something I'd ever used before, but I thought would be an excellent idea, especially given the fact that I personally had done so well with my own food logging, and keeping a food diary was something that I did for so many years. That being said, over the course of 12 months, I had 409 clients. And the average weight loss was 13 pounds, which is excellent because it was my first foray into online training. I had never done any type of online training before, and I was able to help so many people remotely at the beginning of my virtual career. Now, that being said, even though we had given everyone equal access to the food tracking program as part of the platform they were on, out of the 409 people, only 3 people used them. That's a pretty low statistic. And I was surprised that more people didn't avail themselves of the service because we really focused on the fact that it was something that would help them. Because again, there's so many studies out there that show that the more you food track and the more you keep a diary of what you're eating, the more successful you tend to be if you're trying to lose weight. But it really didn't take off. And so what I did, I opened the platform up to all of my clients. In March 2020, when all the gyms here in New York City closed down, my training service went 100% online. And for me, I've stayed online ever since then. And all of a sudden, my clients had access to the same platform. And so they were able to, for the first time, log in their foods using not just a platform where they're writing what they're eating, but taking a photograph of it, which makes it so much easier and so much more convenient with their phones. And out of the 51 people who we had, only 2 took advantage of the service. Again, really small numbers. Now, here's the interesting part. All of my clients did significantly better when we switched to online training because they were more consistent with their training and because I'm pretty sure they were eating out less and thus had more control over what they were eating. Those in the first program I talked about, the 3 people out of the 314 in the organization I was contracted to work with, they all did really well. And among those 3 people who were logging their foods, their average weight loss was 20 pounds. And among my regular personal training clients who decided to track their foods, those who tracked their foods tended to lose a little more weight and see slightly better results than those who weren't. Now, that might lead you to conclude that it's a good idea to track your foods and everyone should be tracking your foods. But here's the problem. Human beings are individuals. We're not herd animals. And with something like weight loss or getting ready for a bodybuilding competition or trying to achieve any goal where there should be some form of documentation, not everyone works the same way. There are essentially 2 ways to approach anything. There's the Apollonian approach, which is very mathematical, methodical, and tends to work really well for those with an analytical mindset. And then there's the Dionysian approach, which is a little more freestyle. See how you feel, see how things go. Not so much into recording and documenting what you're doing, just kind of going with the flow, as they say. Now, trying to make someone who has a more Dionysian approach in almost everything in their lives to somehow or the other switch to an Apollonian approach to track their foods isn't going to work. And I always say this, if a particular weight loss method does not work for you, regardless of what the studies out there say, its success rate is 0% for you. And that's what matters. How does it work best for you? And there are also some other considerations that need to be borne in mind. Namely, if someone has an eating disorder or someone has difficulty with relationships with food, it's not a good idea sometimes, depending on where they are in their path, to be logging their foods. Personally, my approach today is to not log my foods. And that's an evolution because I started off very Apollonian, as I said, logging everything. But there's something that has to be said about sustainability. And what I have found over the years is that the most important aspect of any fitness program, whether you're trying to lose weight, gain weight, put on muscle, get stronger, get ready for a photo shoot, a bodybuilding competition, or just look good for the beach, what matters is sustainability. Because the more sustainable whatever process you're doing, the more likely you are to stick with it. The more likely you are to stick with it, the longer you're going to do it. The longer you're going to do it, the more results you're going to get. Consistency is key. And if there's a method that's going to work only for a short period of time, I don't recommend it because I would rather someone try to find a balance where what they're doing is what they're able to continuously do. And with food tracking, yes, I tracked my foods nonstop for 15 years, but there came a point where I looked at all those notepads and notebooks and thought to myself that I had enough data and that I was spending way too much time documenting every single thing I was eating and not enjoying the process. So even for someone like me, it wasn't sustainable. I was not able to keep on continuing to log my foods for the 33 years that I've been training. And I don't recommend to my clients today because I want them to have a sustainable approach. I want them to have as natural a relationship with their foods as is humanly possible. Now, for some people who are highly motivated and have that Apollonian sense, food logging works for them. And all of my clients have the option of food logging. Most of them don't use it, and I will never push them to because it's important to know what works best for you. Now, if you do food log and you do well, then your results could be 100%. If you're someone who perhaps food logs every single day of their life and has no problem doing so for the rest of their lives and is committed to doing so, and it works for you and it's sustainable, then that's what you should be doing. But for most people, logging every single thing you eat is an inconvenience, and it's something that could probably at best be used temporarily. Now, temporarily, I think it works fantastically. If you're trying to get through a hump and trying to understand your eating patterns, I often recommend for my clients for a short period of time to log their foods just so they have an idea as to what they're really eating besides what they think they're eating. Because when you take the time to document your foods in real time, you tend to find out that the reality of what your dietary composition isn't always what you thought it was. And it also gives you some insight into your eating patterns, when you're more likely to eat the wrong foods and what exactly the circumstances around your eating the wrong foods were. So you'll understand what best to do in the future to avoid those circumstances. But at the same time, it only tends to work temporarily for most people. And that's why I do not recommend for any of my clients that they have to log their foods. It's a service that they can use, but not necessarily one that they have to use. So if you're someone who's using something like myfitnesspal or any of those other food logging programs, and you're seeing great success with it, by all means, keep on going with it. If it's something that works for you, go for it. If you're not, don't feel guilty, because what I tend to see is a lot of my clients feeling guilty about the fact that they're not logging their foods, because so many people are logging their foods and they feel like they're not working as hard as they should be. And that's absolutely false. I always say this, there's more than one way to get up that mountain. And just because a lot of people tend to be going one direction up that mountain doesn't mean that there are other paths, because there are. If I compare the times when I was logging my foods to the times when I was not logging my foods, I can't really see a difference in terms of my progress, because I was consistent whether I was logging my foods or not. For many people, logging their foods makes them more consistent, which really isn't the case for me. Whether I log or not doesn't make a difference. But at the end of the day, what matters is that you find a balance. You find a place also where you're not obsessing about your foods. Foods are meant to be enjoyed, and you have to find that place where what you're eating and what you want to eat are the same things, which does not come easily. And sometimes in trying to get that very spiritual connection with your foods, logging it can make it a little bit difficult for some people. But again, your mileage may vary. And so it's up to you, the individual, to figure out what's best for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on food logging. Does it work for you? Is it something that you think is sustainable? Or have you always felt somehow pressured because you weren't food logging and thinking that you were somehow falling short? Thanks again for tuning in. And as always, Excelsior.